Hello, legendary listeners, and welcome to a new episode of the Legendary Ladies podcast. I'm your host, Amy. I am here with Morgan and Kat. And this week, we're going to be talking about that infamous docu-series that came out just about a month ago, Quiet on Set, which we've been eager to talk about since it started going viral and all the information that dropped came out. I only got a chance to watch it very recently, but Morgan and Kat, you guys watched it earlier this month.
I watched it when it came out. I remember the first episode I didn't watch live, and then the second episode I did. I watched it I found out. Yeah. So I found out about the first one, and then it was trending a lot. And it's and we'll talk about this, like the eras that we're from. Like I grew up very specifically in this era of like the Amanda Show and all that. Like this is very much for like my age. So it was just like I won't say I've always been interested, but I knew about this topic. So I knew this documentary was coming out, but I thought it was just going to be a documentary that was just going to retell all the things I already knew from like Twitter. Like, it's like, I knew Dan Schneider did all that. But then obviously more layers come out and are like, oh wait, no, this is actually like an investigative journalism piece where they're definitely revealing things that no one knew. And honestly, as like a former journalist, I guess you're never just a former journalist, but as a journalist, like that was really interesting to me. Like just seeing it as like a piece. It was just like, it was good reporting, honestly.
Yeah, they did a really good job, I think, with like finding people and talking to them and like learning about what was really going on there.
Well, for instance, the fact that they mentioned multiple times that they reached out to certain people for comments, that they reached out to the judge and actually got those 41 letters from the Brian Peck trial released and straight up just dropped them. Like they name dropped everybody. They're like, yep, James Marsden, he was here. This guy, he was here. Like that shocked me. And again, I didn't watch this until very recently. So I didn't have the shock factor of the Drake Bell situation. What shocked me is that no one else knew. I don't know why, but for some reason I thought that this information had already come out, and maybe truthfully it's because when I heard it, it didn't surprise me that this individual who eventually went on to have a really haggard, rough couple of years, I go, yeah, unfortunately that tracks.
Yeah,
for sure.
And I think it was interesting for me because I think we were talking about the generations of the Nickelodeon. I think we all kind of grew up on Nickelodeon, but because we have gaps between us, I'm like the older end of the millennials and Kat's the younger end. I grew up with like Pete and Are You Afraid of the Dark and
my generation doesn't know that at all. I do.
I don't know what that is.
Clarissa Explains It All and
love
that kind
Clarissa.
of stuff.
Secret World of Alex Mack.
Secret World. We've talked about this a lot. We're big fans on the podcast of the Secret World of Alex Mack. Salute Your Shorts, even. So I grew up and so I did grow up on all that. But like the original all that, like the first couple seasons of all that. And even though Dan Schneider was involved and they talked about those first seasons,
they talked more about the next cast.
Yeah, because he didn't really have a lot of institutional power to like start abusing people allegedly during that time period. So it's like that was kind of his first show. So even though he was terrible to some people, currently distracted by Amy's cat, Rachel says in the chat. But yeah, even though he was terrible to some people early on in that show, it got worse later on as he's created more shows that became hits, and then he started to feel untouchable.
Well, especially
his behavior got worse.
And there's some shows that didn't even reach my generation, but like I knew of. Like I probably stopped watching Nickelodeon. I didn't really get into like the Victorious stuff. Probably Zoe 101 was kind of the last one I was kind of into. But like I have friends who love Victorious, and and because they love Victorious, they love Sam and Cat. And that's when the abuse got really bad with like Ariana Grande and obviously what's her name, McCurdy. made her book, which I
Yeah.
have and I need to read.
What's really funny is after watching this documentary, I was like, I bought that book.
No.
So I dug out Jeanette McCurdy's book.
Oh, you read it?
What was it? I'm Glad My Mom Died.
Yeah.
And I read the book, and I swear I read the book in like 3 or 4 days. Like I the chapters are really short, so like I could always justify like just one more. But I honestly don't have any background, so it was just kind of interesting for me because I have almost no background with Jeanette McCurdy. I never really watched anything that she was in. But the book had gotten a huge buzz like maybe a year or two ago when it first came out. So I bought it then because I was like, everyone's talking about this, and then I just didn't read it. But yeah, it was a really good book. She's a really good writer. The situations she was in were just crazy, and she does talk about the creator,
right?
Who she doesn't name for I would suppose legal liability
defamation.
Reasons. Yeah, but I mean,
considerations.
who else could that have been? Because we all know that he created that show. So it was very obviously him, but she could point and say, I didn't say his name. But she does talk about like how like inappropriate he was with her. And like, there's a part in the book where he takes her out to dinner and he tries to he gives her drinks, and she's like maybe 15 or something at this point. And she's like, I don't really want that. And he was like, you're so like basically like you're so lame. Like the cast of Victorious comes out and drinks all the time. It's like that's a really weird thing to say about like a bunch of 14-year-olds. Like you're not cool.
Definitive gaslighting, which is, I mean, he sounds like Dan Schneider sounds like the king of gaslighting. Did
you watch his interview?
Shocking how much there
about
was.
This because he has an interview.
I didn't. I was like, I don't care what this guy does.
That was kind of my opinion. I read like clips of it in articles because I was like, how did he respond to this?
I watched What's Her Face from Zoe 101, her videos reacting to it. That's how I watch it and give him the click. But it like she has like a 2-hour video, which she does like a lot of these videos on it. No, I mean, it's interesting. And well, Amy, we didn't talk to you about like did you watch Nickelodeon? Which generation Nickelodeon were you?
I was the Sweet Life, Drake and Josh, iCarly generation.
Really?
I didn't really watch
Drake
Victorious.
and Josh. You never watched him like the Amanda Show?
No, I watched some Amanda Show. I watched some all that, but it was not the right time for me because it would come on when I was in practice or rehearsal for things. The stuff that was like for whatever reason, Drake and Josh was the right time. Sweet Life of Zach and Cody, that was the right time to watch it. Either that or they were on syndication more, and iCarly was the right one. But
iCarly showed a lot, so I'm not surprised by it. I didn't get into iCarly as much. Like I like Drake and Josh, but
iCarly.
Around that time, iCarly wasn't for me.
iCarly was great for me. Zoe 101, I really, really enjoyed, mostly because I was a girl from California who wished that was the school that I went to. But I
wanted the Jet X.
I wanted those dorms, man. I thought it was so cool. I remember writing down, like I wrote, as I usually do when I watch stuff like this, I write my notes and my thoughts down, and I remember how much I enjoyed the on-air dares that they talk about as
I didn't remember
traumatic things. I was like, I remember that. And I was like, I distinctly remember thinking, oh, this is funny, or this is hilarious, or oh no, it's gross. And it shows you a prime example of how they were grooming audience members by making this seem normal, that a kid like had to do something ridiculous. I look back at it and I go, what the hell? But that is the whole point of this whole documentary.
Do this thing. Yeah,
exactly. This whole documentary is us sitting there going, what the fuck? Like, how did any of this get to where it did? How did any of this get passed? I just watched this.
Some of the clips that they showed, because this wasn't really my generation, which in some ways I'm actually really happy about. Like I'm sure there were terrible things, by the way, going on some of the shows that I watched growing up, but maybe I'll never know about them, which would be great.
You don't have to. Yeah,
exactly. I don't have to. That's gone from my mind. But no, that like the clips that they were showing about these like online things that they would make with like Ariana Grande. Those I don't know how else you look at
Pickle
those.
Boy.
The Pickle Boy thing was definitely weird.
The one where
Ariana
he passes
Grande,
it to Rave.
Oh,
like
that's right.
When he passes it to what's his face in a little hole in the door, I was like, this is straight up.
Yeah, that's a glory hole. Like, what are we doing here? Like, how else do we read that joke? I mean, as a child, you don't know what that is, but like as an adult, you're like, what?
And what's interesting about the online content is that's a way that parents do not need to see what kids are doing, right? If you're watching television, a lot of times the kid and the parent will be in the same room.
In the background.
They're like, oh, turn that off. But especially when are growing up, and I guess depends on like what household you lived in, but my parents weren't over my shoulder when I'm on the computer. They're just like, whatever, do whatever you want.
Good luck.
Yeah, like good luck, because no one knew stuff about the internet as much back then. So it's just so like there was no parental controls, and like the Amanda Show in particular, they had a website. They had the, and I loved it because it was built into the show. I
loved the Amanda Show.
Yeah, because it's literally built in. Penelope, she would always say go to www.whatever, so she promoted in the show.
That's so funny.
And the bring in the dancing lobsters, like. There's so much to break down about this. But before we dive too far in, a couple of things. First off, if you are a Patreon member, you could be joining us live for this episode. I'm sorry, I had to throw in the advertisement right there, because this is the type of episode that I love having people's opinions on. I love hearing what other people thought of this, because again, most of this just floored me, but not in a I'm surprised sort of way. It floored me in the I cannot believe how much of this actually, like how much people got away with sort of.
Were you spoiled with anything? Because again, you watched it pretty late. Okay, because
I was spoiled with most
Drake
of
Bell,
it.
I'm guessing.
The Drake Bell thing I was spoiled on.
I was not, which was a really cool way to watch it. Was that I did not know about Drake Bell, because I only watched the he wasn't in the first episode, and I had only missed the first episode. And it's getting a lot of buzz. Let me watch it, and I watched the second episode, and I was not spoiled by it, which was actually like that reveal was like kind of crazy, not knowing. I was like, what? They got Drake Bell? Because again, the first episode, I didn't know who the hell they were gonna get. I was like, I see these all that people, but then I saw a clip of Jeanette McCurdy. I'm like, is Jeanette McCurdy gonna be in this show? And then I was like, how many episodes is this? This is like 6. I didn't even know. I really knew nothing going in besides like, and then again, I watched the first 10 minutes. It was almost judging it, where I was like, I know all this already. And then it goes into like the nitty gritty, and I'm like, oh wait, maybe they are doing something different. And then they continue to do something different, and really. Again, it's just good journalism, and you don't get that. You don't get that very often, and it's so interesting because when I spend free time, I like to play my little Call of Duty. I enjoy watching my little YouTube videos, as you guys know. I don't tend to watch television as often, unless it really is an exception. I'll like watch my Top Chef, but this drew me in, and that's kind of a rarity sometimes for me, where I'm like so drawn in that I literally can't wait for the next episode, and I think this one really was paced very well. It never, and not to say bored you, but it's just like it was always engaging.
And there was always something new that they were bringing up that just kept making you like it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. So the other thing I want to point out before we get too far in is that if we have any listeners who are listening or watching on our YouTube for the first time, the three of us have worked in this industry before in different forms, different ways. We've done journalism, comic book writing. I do local theater, which is we all have very different, we know people in the industry. We are familiar enough with the industry that I think that we see this from a somewhat different perspective of maybe, at least I saw it, I go, that could have been us. Like that could have been me. We could have at some point have been in this world, and we could have all fallen into this trap. And it's just kind of wild to think about how easy it was for these kids who just want to do something that they love to be completely trapped in this world. That I think is what shocked me the most, is how easy it was for someone who loves what they're doing to be turned off from what they're doing because of all these terrible things that could have happened to them.
Sure. Yeah, and I think like reading the Jeanette McCurdy book, it just made me even question, like, should there be child actors? Because it does seem like just on the surface it's so exploitative. And obviously she's a very, very edge example. But like her mom had her acting at like 4 years old or something like that, something crazy where like a 4-year-old doesn't have like concrete dreams and ambitions for the future. Like a 4-year-old is just like, I like unicorns, and
and
they
it's
put
child
so much
labor.
so much pressure on these kids. And then when you start to bring in the like financial aspect of it, where it's like suddenly these kids are maybe the providers for their family, that doesn't seem like that should be a child's responsibility at all.
And that one guy who was talking about how he was fully aware of the fact that he was the breadwinner for his family, that one of his dreams was to move his family, quote, out of the hood. And he felt that responsibility. I go, no 13-year-old should ever have to feel that responsibility.
No.
And that is wild to me that they were put into that situation. And it is very jarring.
And I believe this is the same person, but that person also said like, oh, I was fired and it ruined my relationship with my mom. The one really interesting thing about the follow-up interview is that they you know, this is right after the documentary, but you get to see him and his mom interact. Supposedly they hadn't talked. Like they
in like
they didn't even
years.
know the years, and they didn't even know they were doing the documentary together, and they were brought together again because of that documentary. Now they are talking again, and they like had pretty much therapy about it because they're like, I didn't know you were doing this, I didn't know our thoughts, and it like opened me up. And that was definitely the best part of that last episode, and that's something to talk about is like, was it worth it? Because sometimes it's like it's the Tiger King syndrome where it's just like, I don't need more. It was a good couple episodes, but I don't need another spinoff. And I was a little afraid of that, and I think there were some elements of that, if I'm being honest. I think it's just like, you know, I could have gotten this from like an article that they could have interviewed. I don't know if I needed another episode, but there were like little moments like that where I was like, oh, that's interesting. And like, I think the journalist they picked, who I guess is a journalist, I'm pretty sure, like they asked good questions, but I just don't know if it was necessary to have another episode.
Yeah, now I'm blanking on who they had as because I recognized her. Was it
Full
Soledad
disclosure,
O'Brien?
I didn't watch the final one.
You binged this all today. So
I did binge this all today, and I did not anticipate how drawn in I would be. Yeah. I was expecting just a normal docu-series.
Do laundry while you're
I actually was doing laundry, and I literally at one point I had the pair of pants that I was folding, and I just kind of sat down, and it sat in my lap for 25 minutes. And I was blown away by the honesty of these people. And you notice the stories as they're telling it from different perspectives. The adults telling the story of their kids, the kids telling the stories of how they viewed their adults. It's fascinating to me to see what this did to the relationships of children and their parents.
Oh,
at
absolutely.
This young age.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the better things about the bonus episode that they released. It was Soledad O'Brien who was the interviewer, but you know, seeing the him and his mom kind of come back together. They hadn't talked in years, and they had both talked about how the documentary brought them back together, and that they had both sort of independently marked that moment where he got fired from the show as like the moment that really affected their relationship, or like maybe destroyed their relationship for a long time. I just thought that was so interesting that like both of them from different perspectives had pegged that moment as being, you know, sort of the moment. But you also see that with what was it, Drake Bell and his father, that they sort of had kind of a strained relationship for a long time too, just because like watching the documentary and seeing how his dad immediately pegged that guy as a predator, and then it's still happening, was like really hard to watch. I think as like the father must have been just absolutely beside himself that he was like, I called it and I can't believe I still couldn't prevent it from happening.
It was interesting to see the little things that, you know, how it all went down, and it really sucks because again, there is that kind of question narratively, if the father was able to stay in his life, what would have happened? And obviously you wouldn't know, but you know, that was interesting. And then like, there was a few parents here that were like, they were I won't say the only good ones, but they were the ones that actually seemed like they wanted to do something to help their kids and the kids around them. And it's just like they heroes of the story in a lot of ways, but a lot of times you saw some that were able to get their kids out, and then others that couldn't, like Drake Bell's dad.
And it's tough too, because some of the showbiz parents, I mean, obviously they didn't interview every single parent of all the kids, and I'm sure many of them were lovely, but having read like Jeanette McCurdy's book, like not all those showbiz parents are good people or nice or, all that concerned about their kids. So I think that's like another dark side too, is that, some of these kids are being exploited at home as well, where bad things are happening to them. And then they go on set and they're, bad things happen there too.
I think what surprised me, not what surprised, but I guess what I was expecting to see is I actually was in like a very dramatic form. I actually kind of thought that they were going to manage to get Drake's mom in there. Like I'm sure they reached out to her.
Yeah.
Supposedly in the next follow-up episode, they do say like, oh yeah, me and my mom have a good relationship. Like a lot of people villainized her after the doc, but it's just like, what would you do in her position? She didn't know. He was really good at manipulating. Like
he was really good at manipulating.
Yeah. And another thing I thought that was interesting about the follow-up episode, and again, I thought that the follow-up episode was mostly unnecessary. Like I thought it mostly just retread ground that had already been covered in the 4 episodes of the actual series. But
they show clips from the episode.
They do show clips.
It's almost a clip show.
I feel like they were scrambling. They were like, we had no idea it was going to be this popular. Throw something together. But Drake Bell mentions that nobody who wrote those letters in support of, what was his name, like Brian Peck, I think, nobody had reached out to him like privately to apologize.
You've got to be kidding. No one.
That's what he said.
Yeah.
That's what he said. And I found that tough, because I think if you could even buy that they didn't really know what was going on and maybe he just asked them to write him a letter, and then it got read aloud. Like, if that's what the case was, wouldn't you see, oh my God, I can't believe my letter was like used for, I didn't know all the context. And well, I feel like you would be mad and then like upset, and then you would reach out and apologize. The fact that nobody has is pretty damning.
But they talked about on their podcast, like the Will, the guy from, Boy Meets World, and he's like, I worked on him with Spider-Man. He had a chance, to say things, and he didn't.
Yeah.
And I think what's also interesting was the Josh Peck thing, because that was something that kind of came out of the right when it came out. Like Josh Peck had this weird TikTok where he's just like, spray the raid, and is like, what is this? And it seemed like it was directed at Drake Bell, but I actually, I don't know who he is as a person, but I condone him in the moment. He could have easily said, oh, I'm a good guy. Like, look at me. Look at this text I sent Drake Bell. But, and again, I don't know the conversation he had with Drake. Maybe he's like, Drake, tell everyone I'm a good guy. But I kind of like that it was done privately, where he's like, no, you're taking this out of context. Like he's like my brother, and, we might not talk to each other all the time, but he's one of those people I was able to talk to about this. And, he also kind of not gone through what Drake went through, but like, obviously he was very close to the situation.
Yeah. I did think it was interesting that like not more of the people who wrote those letters. And it seems like those letters were hugely impactful in terms of the severity of the sentencing. And
working on other shows,
being able to work on other shows, which is the part in the documentary where I was like, what? Like I feel like all of the stuff in the documentary is pretty shocking, but like it didn't really hit me because it wasn't my generation of Nickelodeon. But when they got to the fact that guy who abused a child got to work on another set with children, I was like, how is that possible? How could they let that happen?
There's definitely 2 questions in my mind where I'm just like, does HBO and Discovery make a follow-up with other shows like Disney? I'm sure there's plenty of Disney things to talk about. And then the other question is, what does this do for the overall conversation of child acting? Does it change anything? Does it not?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question, because whatever, Nickelodeon had that statement about the safeguards that they've put in place, and I hope that's true. But like it does raise some questions about how laissez-faire they seem to have been about the people who were working on the show, because they had like he wasn't the Brian Peck, the guy who was involved with the whole Drake Bell situation, wasn't even the first basically like child molester who worked on this show. Like, how do you have a children's entertainment show and you have more than one person who is inappropriate with children? You feel like after the first one happens, you gotta when you think that you look at the whole show and you're like, we gotta change some things.
But it does go on Dan Snyder's shoulders too, because one thing that's really, really interesting conversation before this thing happened was like when Me Too was starting to become more word. That's when the Dan Snyder stuff started coming out. And being like, oh well, look at the weird stuff he's been doing, and it took years for Nickelodeon to fire him. And they did it so quietly. They didn't even release anything. He was just kind of quietly stepped away from Nickelodeon, saying it was his choice because he was such a powerful person in that company that made him probably billions of dollars. It was just like this very interesting power play that was so obvious in the documentary, but also even from behind the scene, just looking at the world and how it passed along. You're like, yeah, I could connect the dots there.
Yeah, and it was almost like Nickelodeon was bending over backwards for a little while to try to keep him around in some capacity, because they talk about how at a certain point his management style had become so aggressive and terrible that they wouldn't allow him to interact with the cast. So he would be off in a separate room, giving his orders to somebody who would then go and tell the cast, which was at this point, if you're going to let him be around, that's crazy. How is this helping? What is this doing?
You know what's wild though is I have seen in corporate sort of worlds, I've personally seen how hard it is for an individual to get fired for these kind of things. Even if the evidence is overwhelming, there is a shocking level of protection for incompetence and harassment at the top that doesn't exist at the bottom.
No.
And it is just definitive troubles in the workplace that overwhelm me and frustrate me so dramatically. And that's what frustrated me about the first part of the docu-series, that first episode that's really sort of starting to touch on the kids aspect. But first is just going to remind us that this is the kind of general workplace that Dan Schneider created. All the problems that he had with those female writers, the ways that he was having their salaries, the things he had them doing.
Crazy. The having the salary made me so mad that they had to share one salary.
They didn't even know each other. It wasn't like they were
oh yeah, sure, let's do
partners.
Yeah, it's not like they came in as a writing team,
right?
Which you could maybe justify. No, he's like, well, we have room for one woman, but we could take two if they split one salary. What?
And the point where they TV job, so it's like, oh yeah, I guess I'll do this,
Yeah.
And that's the point. Both of them multiple times talk about the fact that they were and I'm just, with baby writers, this was their first gig. They were just so excited to have the job. And I think there are a lot of people, myself included, who identify with this, where you just genuinely don't know any better. You look back and wish you had known this, and you wish you had been given the opportunity to say something, but you're just that nervous and that overwhelmed, and you feel kind of floored by what you have to do to make it happen in this industry. And the fact that they didn't feel safe coming forward then, it's so I don't even know how to describe what it feels like to look at what we have now, and I'm split and I'm torn, because you sit there and you go, that would never happen today, but it does.
But it does.
There are still multiple points where people and men in powerful positions are able to force women in weaker positions to do something just so they don't risk getting fired.
Sure.
Because even in a workplace that's outside of this entertainment industry, that is a huge problem for people who are just trying to grow in an industry. And it makes me envious of certain people who get to have their own businesses or be their own boss or work for a progressive company, because sometimes you do feel like there's just nothing you can do right. You just have to keep chugging on and hope that maybe one day you'll work for a good boss, or hope maybe one day you'll be your own boss. But the fact that they had to go through this, and we are still dealing with this today, not to this extent, I hope, but the fact that we're still dealing with this is just such a shocking account of the industry in general.
And that's
Hollywood
something that was... Oh God,
Precious.
Christ.
That was
Hollywood,
super cute.
yeah. Hollywood is a very insular industry too. So I mean, I didn't even I think they made the right call by not making big waves, because then you get branded as being difficult to work with. And so somebody hears that you're difficult to work with fifth hand, and they don't know that the reason you're difficult is because your boss was trying to making you simulate weird sex acts or something so that everybody could laugh. But all they hear is that you're difficult, and then they have something come up and maybe you put in for it, and they're like, I don't know, I heard she's difficult. And you don't get it, and you never know why. And that's kind of what has happened a lot in the entertainment industry, where these people get labeled difficult, or they get harassed, and they're like, what am I doing this for? And they drop out. And you think about all the talented people that we'll never know about, talented writers and comedians and actors and actresses that just were like, this isn't worth it, which is a pretty normal response to stuff like this, and just left.
And I think what's interesting about this documentary, though, is that they uncover so many different facets of Hollywood. It's not just the female writers. It's not just the Drake Bell story. It's a lot of different facets in every episode.
And this is what shocks me. We talk about, Morgan, what you just said about how they will, quote, be labeled as difficult and they'll never work in the industry again. But Brian Peck is convicted and serves time as a child offender, and then gets to work on another show with children. That blew my mind. Those of you who are on the YouTube channel, you can see my little notebook where I just wrote, he keeps writing, he got to work on The Sweet Life. I was so overwhelmed. I don't even know if I
blue
underline, circled. That blew my mind. And that, I hope, is something that has changed in this industry. They do start talking about it a little bit at the end of the 4th episode, where how there are new, or Nickelodeon, at the time started to develop new rules about how, they're not just going to do background checks on the primary people, they're also going to do it on outside contractors. And I was like, you didn't? You are letting someone into this area and you don't do their background checks?
I will say, on
for me.
The Loud House, the creator of that show, season 2, he got fired because he was mistreating his writers. I don't know if it was sexually, I don't remember, but it was definitely a lot of mistreatment and hate. And he had to get fired from his own show. And it took 2 seasons, though.
Oh no.
And that was how, The Loud House is not, it's not an old show, it's newish. Probably that happened in the last 5 years.
And then there was that the recent Maureen Ryan book that came out, I think this year or last year, that I bought but still haven't read.
Same.
But I think it's called Burn It Down or something. That's all about these situations happening in Hollywood, and some of our favorite shows, things like Lost, and just the sort of toxic environments that a lot of people have to put up with to pay their dues to get into a position where they can actually, have the institutional power to push back on stuff.
Oh, I think, Amy, your mic went off a little bit. Got a little hot there.
Oh, can you hear me now?
It's good now. There's did you hear that, Morgan? Yeah, okay.
I just get really staticky. Well,
I wasn't sure if it was mine or Amy's, so I unplugged and replugged mine in.
Either way, it's all good now.
So let's kind of move on. So you know, that I just wrote down toxic masculinity in my notebook because that is definitive what most of this is. But let's move on to the whole, you know, getting into the Brian Peck thing, because that story that they told about the John Wayne Gacy photo, where all the kids walk in, all the adults walk in, and no one seems to think this is a problem.
Sure. It's definitely scary.
That was wild to me. Like that he was showing, he's like, oh, here are my pen pal letters with John, like the serial killer clown, John Wayne Gacy. I feel like a normal response to that is, boy, that's weird. That is super weird.
I wouldn't tell them to their face, but I'd be like, I'm never seeing that person again.
I would be like, fascinating hobby. I just got a call that says I have to leave immediately.
See you later.
Not related to that.
You're like, nope, we're leaving this very creepy room that has balloons on the wall. No, thank you.
Oh.
But what it shows is how much the kids were being groomed. They were 100% being groomed to accept the fact that this was normal, to accept the fact that this was a normal person. And he was like, it is definitive grooming. And it may be that I've watched every single episode of Law and Order Special Victims Unit, but this seems so obvious to me.
There's so many of those episodes.
I have, and I've man, I have so many thoughts about Law and Order SVU. It's really good right now, by the way. So is Organized Crime. Anyway, it's so absolutely terrifying. And yet you can see how it's so effective. You can see how predators are good at doing what they're doing, because most predators that you see who are truly successful in what they do are the ones like this, who are very charismatic, who will groom their individuals and then eventually get to the point where that individual feels like they can't come forward because there's a completely inappropriate logic that they have about how I don't want to hurt this person who did all these terrible things to me.
Sure.
Do I become the asshole? Do I become the terrible person by putting this person on, you know, on hot coals? And Drake talks about that.
And when he started to realize with his girlfriend's mom, which I thought was very interesting, and most people pinpointed as a very interesting part of the documentary, is just that took that to realize, maybe this is a little weird.
I was like, if there's one champ from this documentary, it's that girlfriend's 100%. Mom that was like, I'm sorry, a 30-something-year-old man should not be calling you this.
Who didn't have to do anything either. Again, like, you know, she could have just sat back and said, that's his thing. Like, I'm not really related to this guy. But he's like, all right, you know what? He's hung out at my house enough, or like, you just want to be a good person. Like, I don't think that's a good idea.
Yeah, she saw like a kid that was her daughter's age, and she knew something was off. And I was like, good for this lady. This is like the most reasonable person in this documentary, because she was like, wait a minute, why is this grown adult man calling you so many times, mad that you're blowing him off to go hang out? Why are you hanging out solo with like a 35-year-old? That's weird.
Right.
And I think he was older at that point. I think he was in his 40s.
In his
like he was in his 40s. And it is shocking that Drake points out, like, she recognized it in 6 seconds flat. She knew immediately that this was wrong. And that also is part of the sort of cycle that these kid actors get set in, is that it starts to normalize it for them. It normalizes it for their parents. Their friends are all in the industry. So it almost sounds like maybe, you know, obviously we don't know who this girlfriend is. And part of me, I'm sure there's a corner of the internet that has figured it out, that wants to know who the girlfriend is and figured out who it was. I secretly hope we never find out, because I hope that that person gets to just live in that respect and anonymity that we've given them. But I wonder if that individual's not in the industry. I wonder if that individual is
felt that way. I'll say
that way
in the interview.
Yeah.
It felt like, they knew each other from something else. It didn't feel like, she's also a child actor. Like, it just didn't feel like that vibe.
It's just such a powerful reminder for advocating for young people and being sure to step up when you notice something is wrong, which is so hard. I don't know if you guys
you can't
ever
hardly
heard
do
of-
that as an adult sometimes. So it's like,
I
you make a
know.
14-year-old
So
kid do
hard.
that.
Dude, it's so hard to step up and to say, hey, this feels wrong. Or it's so hard to step up and say, hey, I think something's wrong with that thing.
Sure.
And I mean, I don't know what kind of experience you guys ever have with that, but I am like, I will defend someone who has been put in a bad situation in a workplace environment. I turn into Mama Bear, and I will always go to town for someone who has been in a situation. Like I'm the person where I'm like, he said what to you? I will start cracking my knuckles and going straight at you barefisted. And I've had the privilege of working with a lot of young actors and actresses recently in the stage work I've been doing. And maybe that's why this hit me so hard.
Sure.
Because I cannot imagine the people that I've worked with being in this position. And I've been lucky to see them all in really safe positions. And I have been exceptionally lucky to actually see the theater companies that I've worked for protect their young actors. When I did my last production in October, the theater company had very clear rules about working with minors, about where they were allowed to dress, about how they were allowed to be in the same area with adults, what we were allowed to say, what we were not allowed to say. Like literally at 9 o'clock, they were out. And it was like, we went out, all the adults would joke, all right, 9 o'clock's out. We can start cussing now. But we would hold in our sailor mouths until 9 o'clock. And the level of respect that company had for the young theater actors and that every adult actor in that room had for these young actors was beautiful. And to ever imagine any one of those remarkable, talented young actors being in this sort of position made me so angry. This whole thing, it just made me angry, like overwhelmingly angry. Again, Mama Bear, bare knuckle wanted to go in there and be like, how dare you? How dare you put kids in this sort of a position?
Yeah, it's just crazy. It's just crazy, like the inappropriate, not just the way that they were being treated by like the people on set, but also the situations that they were put in, that there were these obviously sexual jokes that like it's fine if you're an adult writing like sexual jokes or whatever for an adult audience, but to make children like act out this joke that like the only people who are going to get are like adults is just really sick. It's so inappropriate.
I wonder the line, the hard line of like a hit girl. I don't know if you guys seen like Kick Ass, but like someone who's a younger actor who has to play a dirty role for adult audiences. Like that feels like such a gray area to me.
You know, but that makes me think of that I've always struggled with is something like Game of Thrones. Where
sure, exactly.
You've got,
Yeah.
you know, like Sansa and Arya Stark. You sit there and you go, what does this young actress think when they're filming this? And I you know, I hope, and I do know, at least in my experience, with times that I've seen adults explaining to kids, hey, this is something that is going to feel really bad because it's not a good thing, but it's okay that you feel bad about it because it's not a good thing. And that we're telling a story, but the story is ultimately about how to get past this bad thing.
Sure. That's a good way to explain things.
Yeah.
And that's something that I've always been passionate about as well when I'm working with young people, is like, hey, if this doesn't make sense to you or you ever feel like I don't get it, you come talk to me, come ask questions. But what about a show like Game of Thrones, where you've got characters who are essentially portraying minors who are being physically assaulted? How do you tell the kid, oh, this is just make-believe? Just turn off your thoughts, turn off your emotions.
And when
pretend.
you're filming, that's not, it's a 2-minute scene for
feel
you,
make-believe.
but well, also it's 2 days that you're doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
Like, it's, you know, it makes sense watching something like this where you go,
where's the line? What is the line? Yeah.
You know, kids get into alcoholism or drugs. And
I was about to say, I think that's also one of the things, especially from reading the Jeanette McCurdy book, where it's like some of these situations that the kids get into so young, you're like, what chance do they have to not develop bad habits as coping mechanisms? You know,
look at Amanda Bynes. I mean, that's another whole example of like, you know,
Lindsay Lohan.
Lindsay,
yeah.
but honestly, Amanda even more, because of Lindsay Lohan, you could see that she's kind of coherent. Like Amanda's so lost that her words aren't incoherent anymore. Whatever happened to her was that detrimental to her psyche that she literally, it's hard for her to like string words together.
Yeah, and we don't know what exactly went on with her, but I think you can draw some conclusions just based off of the fact that, you know, she was working closely with Dan Schneider and he was treating everybody very badly. And she was very young. Like I think getting your, you know, being treated like that by an adult you look up to when you're very young is going to do some bad things for your self-esteem, your self-worth, how you like look at and think about yourself. And it's just so sad that these kids were being treated this way. Like, it's bad enough when the adults are trying to get into the industry and they like kind of know like, okay, it's going to suck for a couple of years or it's going to suck for a while and then hopefully it'll turn. But I mean, if you're 10 or something, like what does that do to you?
And it creates such a convoluted world as well, because it's also clear that Dan Schneider had individuals he was supportive to, and it's convoluted way, because Drake makes a point in this episode about talking about how Dan called him and offered support, and based on the way that Drake was telling the story, that was a genuine offer. And they mentioned it a couple times that like Drake has never had a problem with Dan Schneider, and part of me wanted to be like, that's because you're not a girl. Like he very clearly had such a deep ingrained sexism, and it just the whole thing is convoluted. It's so hard to look at, and it's so frustrating because that is how predators disguise themselves. People will defend them to the ends of the earth. It's the whole problem with Me Too. It's he wasn't like that.
Well, he's
for
not
me.
like that to me. Yeah, I think people like to think that if somebody's a jerk, they're a jerk to every single person that they interact with, and not that if somebody that your friend that you know and that you like might be great to you, but might be a jerk to the, you know, the person working under them because they've got less power, or to, you know, the servers or something when they go out to eat, or you know, they're rarely doing it to their bosses, let's put it that way.
Yeah. And there are people who are really good at hiding the fact that they choose the person that they want to be for the right situation. And you know what's wild is I was looking back earlier today over some of the most recent episodes that these people have done, like the three of us, and it makes me think of Whiplash.
Yeah.
Because who's your main character, the professor? What's his name?
Fletcher.
Oh yeah.
Who's a complete abusive asshole to all of his students, and yet then he goes up to kids and he's like, "Hi, I'm Mr. Bright and Shiny," and you're like, "Oh, I believe that."
Yeah,
and it's just textbook abuser, and it's so heartbreaking to watch things like this and to know that these kids have been put in this situation.
It's like, I hate to say it this way, but it's smart on the abuser's side as well, because when these accusations come up and everybody goes, not him, he's so nice to me, he's been so great to me, I've worked with him for years and he's never been like that to me. And
They're
so
then calculated.
Then it becomes so
letters.
easy. You get 41 letters. It becomes so easy to believe that, oh, this must not be right. There must not be true. And then this is the exact way that people end up blaming victims and saying like, oh, they must have been lying, or they must have been this, or they must have been that. Some of those letters made me disgusted with the way that they phrased it. Like, he must have been tempted. No. That's not how any of this works.
No.
I was livid. I was like, you can't just oh, it's my fault. It's definitive. If she didn't want it, she shouldn't have dressed that way.
It's 100%. It's victim blaming.
Makes me so angry. It's victim blaming, and it's just, you know,
it's like textbook. It's like textbook victim blaming. And also, when you're talking about children, I don't care what happens. A 14-year-old or a 13-year-old or whatever cannot consent to that. So, like, what are you even talking about?
Yeah. I literally just wrote a political satire that had this in this, and it was literally
That's interesting. You wrote
a line.
it.
That's so true.
Before I saw this, I
Yeah,
actually
before you
kind of
watched
wish
it.
I'd seen after it, because I would have just leaned really heavily into it. But
Right.
it was literally about toxic masculinity and the challenge that females have accomplishing anything in the workplace, unless it's the man's idea in the first place. But literally the line is, if the damsel hadn't wanted to be rescued, she shouldn't have been in distress in the first place. And that's exactly what this is. And it's so frustrating and overwhelming, because I think on top of everything, the three of us as females who are generally pretty independent, kick-ass women, we still have to watch out for this. And the fact that I've been in this position before. I don't know about either of you, but I have definitely been in a position where I've been gaslit by men who could have chosen to step up and protect me, and chose to protect themselves instead.
Or you even have like
frustrating.
but you even have like sometimes like little small encounters where it's like, you know, I'll see, go to a hotel, right, and be like, oh, you know, I run this business, and they like turn to my male business partner, it's like, oh, it's your business. It's like, no, it's both our, like, you know, it's like they automatically go to the guy in the conversation, be like, I'm going to talk to you. It's like, no, talk to me. I'm the one you're talking to right now.
So
it's like, yeah, I think society in general that will happen. Sadly, sexism exists, but yeah, no, it's an interesting documentary where I don't think it's a period to a sentence. I think it's, you know, there's more
to start to a conversation.
Sure, yeah, hopefully there's more conversations to be had, and hopefully more places to correct if there are more conversations.
I hope that the experience that I've had in theater recently is just an indicator of how people are trying to move, especially I don't know what the entertainment industry is like. Small community theaters have a little bit more freedom to be a little bit more forward thinking, but I did a show with minors 9 years ago, and I did a show with minors 4 months ago. And I will tell you that the difference in the workplace was dramatic, and it was a difference in the transparency. These are the rules we have with kids. These are what you're allowed to do with the kids. These are the very clear, set down, documented rules that we have. And that's not to say that every theater in San Diego is following that. There are some pretty scary stuff that's come out about working in theaters in San Diego especially youth theaters in the last 15, 20 years. There's been some stuff that's come up about some pretty big youth theater companies is jarring. And I was not a part of it because I wasn't in those companies, because we didn't have the money. We couldn't afford the money to join those companies. You had to pay like $300-$400 per show.
Oh my God.
Which is still unfortunately not abnormal for youth productions, but there's more scholarship options. Anyway, I was never at risk for that, but there are a lot of kids that were, and there are a lot of problems still in the theater industry. But I hope that the experience that I've had is just an indicator of how things can move in the right direction. And it's very positive and encouraging. And I will say that every single person who was in this last show with me, they will take what they have learned, and that is the expectation they will have for the next time they work with young actors and actresses. And I hope that a docu-series like this inspires other adults in this industry to be willing to stand up for something that is wrong, because there were 100 people on those sets that could have done more.
I mean, and I don't even think we really talked about this much, but it came up a little bit in the follow-up episode, but like the racial component as well, which obviously everybody in the cast and crew and the writers could see that some of the sketches, say on all that with the Black cast members, were not okay.
No.
And were very stereotypical and were pretty racist, and they just let it happen. And it's like, there's a 12-year-old kid here that you're making feel very bad, and you're racially stereotyping. Does any adult want to take a step in and say something?
And the girl said that she's like, oh, if I wanted good material, I had to write it myself and like pitch it. I'm like, you're 14, 13, and you're doing two people's jobs just because you want good stories? Like, that sucks. I mean, you know, good that you were able to get a good story because you were proactive, but that sucks that you had to do that because of racial discrimination and all that, you know.
Yeah, and they
All
they
that.
talked about oh that's funny.
Didn't
They
mean to
talked
do
about
that, but sure.
they talked about like the the actors and stuff being the only ones, like the only black girl or the only black boy on the cast, and you really did get the impression that like they might have been the only like black person in the room, like that there
Definitely,
was
yeah.
behind the
Mhm.
camera in the writers' room, all white, all white. So who was it? Like they talk about that with the I can't remember his name, but him and his mother, where
Mhm.
the mother was clocking these things that were not
Sure.
okay, and part of the reason it sounded
She was
like
a
that he
hero
got
too.
she was
She
Yeah.
great. Part of the
she
reason that he
taught a
got
lot.
fired was because she couldn't just sit there and like,
Mhm.
Mhm.
bite down and like be quiet about it. She had to be like, "Hey, hold on. Hold on. What are we doing in this sketch?"
Sure.
I don't
And
think that that's okay.
you know what was happening? The other cast members' parents were going, "See, that's what happens when you make waves. You get
Sure.
fired."
Absolutely.
And they
Absolutely.
learned to not step up when they needed to because of the real and genuine fear that you might get fired.
Or you're
And you
pushed
know,
out like Drake Bell's dad, like
yeah,
who was just very easily
yes.
pushed out, even though he cared so much. He, one bad day, he was out of Drake Bell's life completely. I forgot what the exciting incident was that he was
Um,
pushed out, but
it was just it was basically
oh, he
he
wasn't the
convinced
manager
Drake
anymore.
that he
Yeah,
shouldn't be
yeah,
the manager.
yeah,
And then when he called and said, "I don't want you to be a manager. I basically don't want you to be with me anymore. I want you to go back to I want to go back and live with my mom."
yeah. That was
Um,
it.
and it broke his dad's heart. Like that was so sad. And the other thing that, bringing back up this conversation about race, is that one young gentleman was talking about how the fact that he knew it was about race. He
Oh
understood
yeah.
that this was wrong, and he
Even at
still
such
had
a
to
young
play
age,
into
too.
it, even at
Yeah.
such a young
Mhm.
age, which unfortunately I think is a product of a lot of individuals of color, is that they learn at a young age that they are different and that they have to treat things differently. And it is so heartbreaking to see individuals like that have to know that and live in that world, because
And
that's where the
it's
three of us were
That
protected.
yeah,
that was
true.
said in the follow-up too, where they were saying, I forgot the exact words, but it's like you learn so early on and then you have to like try 5 times harder than,
Hmm.
I forget the exact words, but it's pretty much like that. And you're like, yeah, and I
Yeah.
just thought it was very interesting. They definitely said it better than I did, but
Yeah, and I think it's also like I feel like they didn't give enough credit to how smart and perceptive children are. They might not know the specifics of something being wrong, but like they even I think they said in that follow-up, like with some of the sexual jokes that went over their heads, they were like, no, we knew that they were laughing and that it was bad, but we just didn't know why exactly. But it made
sure.
us feel uncomfortable and it made us feel weird.
And you
And
shouldn't feel uncomfortable.
They
exactly. It's the
got
same thing there. It's like, they might not know the specifics of like why something that they have to do is bad or like demoralizing, but they know that it doesn't feel right.
Do you guys know the Gen Z phrase, "I got the ick"? Have you
No.
guys heard the ick?
I have heard about the ick,
So
I am
the
but
not.
I'm
ick
100
the
years old,
ick
so
is that sensation. The ick is the
Good,
vibe.
good
The
for
ick is that
good for them that
identified
they have a
sign.
word.
But I was just thinking that. Think about kids back then. If they had a
Kids
word
back
to
when
describe it.
we were kids. I mean, I'm sure just times where you're like, oh, I didn't understand that, and that makes me feel bad.
Yeah.
Like I'm not in on the joke.
But
Yeah, I mean, everyone feels that
there's
way.
something somewhat sensationalized about a generation in a good way that has literally identified this
I mean, they know their
sensation of
feelings
this is
more than
wrong.
we do. I mean,
They
that's
oh
something.
yeah,
true,
absolutely. But
true.
I mean, I used to we've used it in our workplace before. We've
That's
used
so
the
interesting.
ick, like you give me the ick, or
I've never heard that, but
it's a new Gen Z phase, and I will be honest. A lot of the people that I've worked with, I'm gonna really try not to get specific here, but a lot of people that I've worked with, in the last few years in different places, I'm gonna be as vague as possible. We are all about the same age, and we've had an individual step in where all of us got the ick, and we actually, the way that this person would stand in our vicinity, the way they stepped, the way that they touched, we all got the ick, and the ick actually became a way that we were communicating with each other. Like, I need help.
That's good.
But it is interesting to me that I'd never thought about this till right now, that there's a whole generation of young people that have identified and are willing to speak to that moment of, this is wrong. Like, I don't like the sensation that I'm getting right now, because our human bodies are meant to protect us. There's a whole, again, Law and Order episode about an individual where she gets re-victimized multiple times in a row because she gets the ick and doesn't trust it. Because she says, well, no, that happened last time, but I don't want to put everybody in a box. I don't want to assume everybody wants to hurt me. And the detective tells her, your body is doing this because you're getting this sensation, and it's right. Your body is trying to protect you. You have to learn to trust yourself again. And apparently it's actually, like, statistically really common for people to be re-victimized because they give someone who is giving them that creepy sensation too much benefit of the doubt.
Sure.
Like, re-victimizing is really, unfortunately, very common in a world like that. But all this is to say, like, I hope that the generations that are coming up are being put in positions where they can better protect themselves, where they can better voice their concern. I think there's a long way to go, and there is a lot of work to be done. I mean, even just looking at the changes that have happened in the industry in the last 9 months because of the union strikes.
Sure.
I mean, the whole industry is changing. And I hope it's for the better, but I know people who are on the other end of that. But I hope documentaries like this make people willing to stand up for somebody else, even if it's terrifying, even if it's absolutely scary and you don't want to do it. I hope people are willing to stand up for themselves and each other.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that's my TED Talk. Thanks for coming. If you cannot tell, I'm very passionate about this. And I do think a lot of it is that I've got so many young, like I've worked with so many young actors and actresses that it would just absolutely terrify me to see. Like, I will go mama bear. And don't make me go mama bear. I am scary. Like, no one has ever seen me truly angry. People have seen me frustrated. No one has really seen me angry.
We've known you for a very long time, and I cannot think of a time I've seen you frustrated, but not angry.
You've seen, like, there's like, I'm frustrated and tired and overwhelmed, and then there's I'm frustrated because you're incompetent. Not you guys. I've had incompetent. I've had incompetent frustrated where I'm like, could you just let me do it because you're doing it wrong? But, like, I've had that in like medical workplaces, but there's only really a handful of times, if ever, that people have ever seen me angry. But if something like that were to step up, you better watch out. I'm coming in swinging.
And you know,
with us.
And I'm glad you liked the documentary, because you know, I know me and Morgan had to watch it before, a month ago or whatever. So we're like, oh yeah, Amy hasn't seen it yet, and I wanted to get your perspective for sure as well. So it's good that, we definitely, all three of us were just completely engaged by it. Even though, again, we're all different generations of this Nickelodeon thing. I don't think, obviously the whole point of the documentary is that there's bigger things to be said than just Nickelodeon. You don't have to be a Nickelodeon kid to understand the universal thoughts that are being told here.
Yeah, I think it does probably hit harder for people like you guys who did grow up with these shows to know that all this bad stuff was going on behind the scenes. And I think that's, I mean, again, enough of our entertainment that we enjoyed growing up has been ruined by various scandals at this point.
Yeah,
that it's like, well, Smallville's weird for me now. So it's a familiar feeling to be like, oh yeah, this thing that I used to love, I now have to love with like an asterisk next to it. It's like, I love it, but like not the institutional abuse that happened.
Or Buffy.
Exactly.
Yeah, Angel.
Yes, Firefly.
Apparently.
Castle.
Yeah.
Which I loved. Learning the drama that happens the last few seasons broke my heart. Learning about all the stuff that went on with Colton Haynes and Arrow broke my heart.
Oh yeah.
But like, it's so convoluted though, because the kids, it is literally love it, but with an asterisk. Like, the kids on this documentary repeatedly talked about the fact that they did still have the time of their lives. That when they were on set, when they were filming, they made great friends. They were having the time of their life.
It's interesting that again, I keep going back to this the episode after, so I guess there was some nuggets there. But the girl, she said that that she actually returned to a Dan Snyder show and went on it, and so she went on another Dan Snyder show. I don't know. She didn't really go into details of why, like if it was because money or just because she's like, hey, there's aspects I did like about this and I like about acting. So, and they all three of them end up, there's another person that was from All That. They like get onto this episode, and you can just tell like they were like an army together, right? They grew up with each other. They even said like, we don't see each other every day, but like, these are like my brothers, these are my family because I grew up with these people.
Yeah, it's just so convoluted and wild. But I hope that things change, and I hope that this was a positive, enlightening experience. I think it was for everybody. I from what I've seen, the internet was like, what the fuck? Like this, we've learned a lot. So do you guys have any final thoughts you'd like to share about the episode? Or the series, rather.
Go watch it if you haven't.
Yeah,
I'm guessing you have if you watched all this. So.
Yeah, I just think it was really well done. I think the producers of the series, I think it was great that they tracked down so many former cast members and let them tell their stories like in their own voices, which I think is really important when you're talking about sort of delicate subjects like this. So I think that they did a really good job with the material.
Did you catch that one line where one of the writers, one of the two that were sharing their salary, where I don't remember which one it was, but she's like, "There's a reason that only the two of us are here." Who you guys? She basically they said you guys reached out to everybody and only we're here.
Yeah, and also the clothes designer.
Yeah,
the clothes designer didn't show their face. There's definitely things.
I do wonder if some of those things are NDAs. Which I did. I found myself in a little internet rabbit hole about how like some things like this, people are actually not allowed to say anything because they've signed NDAs that are binding and legal. Which so there's all going to be more to the story that we're just never going to know.
And they were part of the first season of that show, so maybe they built in those NDAs a lot later. So it's like, they didn't have it then, but.
And it does feel like those kind of workplace NDAs should not be legal. I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. Because what it does is it just works to cover up abuse and protect the employer and not the actual human beings who are the ones that are maybe being mistreated or being abused. I mean, if you get an abuse and then to get money that you maybe need to live, you need to sign an NDA. Well, like you're going to sign an NDA. But then that means that you can't say anything about all these bad things that happen to you, which seems crazy to me. How do you address a problem if you've gagged everybody who could tell you about it?
Sure.
It's wild, man. That's the title of this podcast episode. It's wild, man.
It's wild, man.
It's wild, man. So I think that's going to wrap up this conversation. I would love to hear from people who watched this, who maybe approach it from different perspectives. If you guys have different thoughts on the series, if you guys just want to rant and tell us your thoughts, we would love to hear it. You can email us, thelegendaryladies@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter, legends_podcast, Instagram, The Legendary Ladies. You can also join us on Patreon, The Legendary Ladies, on Patreon, so patreon.com/The Legendary Ladies. We've got different levels. If you join at our higher level, you can actually participate in these podcast episodes live. Give us your thoughts on the chat. We do have a couple of fun episodes. This is a very serious episode.
This one was
this is a heavy hitter episode. We've got a couple musical episodes coming up. We are going to be reviewing the new Taylor Swift.
That came out just now.
Literally just dropped 6 minutes ago.
I'm ready to start listening.
I forgot about it until I just went on the YouTube tab and Post Malone and Taylor Swift has their song. Like, I want to see it.
Oh my God, that's what we should do for our Patreon episode. The three of us should listen to one song live together and live react to it. Let's do that. If you guys are on Patreon and you want to see it,
that'd be
fun. You're gonna have to join our Patreon. Let's do it.
Taylor time.
After this.
I think we picked the Post Malone.
Yeah, we got it.
Apparently. Love it. So join us on Patreon for some really fun stuff. But I think that's going to wrap up this episode. We've got a couple more musical things besides Taylor Swift. What else is up, Kat?
The Maggie Rogers
That's
2
right.
albums. Yeah. That's fun.
So we're going to be compare and contrast. But yeah, thank you guys so much for joining in and listening. Rachel, who's in the chat, said that she's leaving us to go onto Spotify and listen. We also have some really cool feedback we'll read from our Beyonce album cover.
Most likely
in
the next one. That's
when
more
we record
related.
our Taylor episode, we'll talk about the Beyonce
since we're back
YouTube
to
comments we got, which on our slightly less serious and less dramatic episode. But thank you guys so much for listening. We really hope you enjoyed this conversation. Again, share your thoughts. We are a podcast that does not have any advertisements because we believe that you guys should hear directly from us at all times. So if you would like to support us, Patreon is the best way to do so. We really appreciate all of you joining in. But real fast, what's everybody got going on? Morgan, where can people find you online?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Mojotastic. And you can also find me as a co-host on Supergirl Radio, where we're going through the DC animated Tomorrowverse movies to prepare ourselves for Crisis Part 2 that's coming out soon. I think we're down to our last movie. I think it's the Justice League one. I keep saying I think because I'm not sure, but I'll discover it next week. So you should join us live on the DC TV podcast YouTube channel Tuesdays at 9 Eastern. And that's when we podcast. How about you, Kat? What maybe a Kickstarter thing do you have?
I don't know. Do you have like a Kickstarter going on? Is it going exceptionally well?
Is it
It
going
would be going well. Well, if you like Wizard of Oz, we have the Witches of Oz, which is finally Glinda and the Wicked Witch getting together. It is not safe for work, but we call this more the mature one. It has not safe for work elements in it, but it's probably the least not safe for work out of all the other ones. So yeah, it's like Game of Thrones style, not safe for work, which I always describe these books as. But yeah, we are having a great time with it. It launched Monday, almost at like $50,000, which is crazy.
My God.
I know. Check out the book. We're really proud of it. It's part of a bigger universe, the Ever Afterverse, but you don't need to read those other books. But if you like kind of bigger worlds, go check out the other books too, which you could check out on the Kickstarter. So the Witches of Oz issue 1, it's again on Kickstarter at Comic Uno if you want like a direct link for that. So check it out.
Love it. And then you guys can find me performing in 2 productions this summer. The first is an original production that has never before been performed in Carlsbad on May 4th and 5th in California. It's called The Wind People, and it is kind of like a post-apocalyptic a cappella musical that talks about what happens if a small society of people gets completely segregated from the rest of the United States and is lied to about why they're there in the first place.
Ooh.
As well as Much Ado About Nothing in Temecula on July 11th through the 20th. I get to play Beatrice, who is a super snarky, fantastic lead role, which I'm really excited about playing with a really, really cool group of people at the Bailiana Winery in Temecula. Shakespeare in the Vines. You guys can find me on Instagram, Amy_hip. That's Amy_HYP, which is where you can find tickets. The Wind People has very limited seating, but it's got a group of genuine professional actors. We've got a Broadway actor. We've got an opera singer. We've got two young female actresses who will be famous one day. Like 100%.
Wow.
Their name will be in lights. Like these two, they're excellent. So, if anyone's able to come and join us in California, it's super fun. I will send you the ticket link. But I think that's going to wrap it up for us. Again, you can find us on Instagram, The Legendary Ladies anywhere you listen to your podcasts. And right now we're going to go listen to some Taylor Swift. So thanks for joining us so much and stay legendary.